Marcus had always dreamed of owning a home with a beautiful backyard, and when he finally bought a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, he felt like he had truly made it. The house was perfect, modern, spacious, and nestled in a safe, peaceful community. It was a fresh start for him, away from the hustle and bustle of city life and into the serenity of the suburbs. His favorite part of the house was the backyard, which came with a stunning hot tub. After long, exhausting days at work, Marcus would look forward to relaxing in the warm water, letting the jets ease his stress and clear his mind. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could unwind in solitude and enjoy his personal space. For the first few weeks, Marcus didn't hear much from his neighbors. Everyone kept to themselves, which was exactly what he wanted. He loved the peacefulness of the neighborhood and the privacy that came with living in a house surrounded by other homes, but still feeling far removed from everyone else. The days were peaceful, and Marcus could come home from work, change into his swim shorts and head straight to the hot tub without a second thought. But that peace didn't last long. Slowly, as days turned into weeks, Marcus began to notice small things that started to chip away at his tranquility. The first sign that his peaceful life might be at risk came when a friendly, older neighbor named Mrs. Turner waved at him one afternoon while he was working in the garden. She was in her late 60s and had lived in the neighborhood for years. She greeted him warmly, asking how he was settling in. After a short chat about the neighborhood, she casually mentioned, "You." "No, Karen is the head of the HOA and she's she takes a lot of pride in making sure everyone follows the rules here. She'll be sure to stop by to welcome you soon." Marcus didn't think much of it. He knew what an HOA was. Homeowners associations were meant to maintain order and ensure that everything stayed in good condition. But he had no idea that Karen, the woman Mrs. Turner was referring to, was someone with such a strong sense of authority. Days passed, and Marcus continued to enjoy his quiet time. He spent most evenings in his hot tub, watching the sky turn dark and the stars begin to twinkle above. But one afternoon, just as he was stepping into the hot tub, he noticed a woman standing by his back fence. She was looking at him, not in a curious or alarming way, but with a certain type of gaze that made Marcus uncomfortable. He couldn't quite place it, but there was something about her that felt off. "Hi there," the woman called out. "I'm Karen. I live down the street and I'm part of the HOA. I've been meaning to stop by and introduce myself. Your hot tub looks amazing, by the way. It must be so relaxing." Marcus, a little surprised, smiled politely. "Thanks. It's definitely a great way to relax after work." Karen's eyes sparkled as she leaned on the fence. "You know, the community is always looking for fun activities. I'm sure there's a lot of interest in having access to a hot tub like yours. I was thinking, maybe you wouldn't mind if I brought some of my friends by to enjoy it with you." "Sometime?" Marcus blinked, not quite sure how to respond. He had just met this woman and she was already talking about inviting other people to his private space. "Oh, well, I usually like to keep it private," he replied carefully. "I tend to use it after work when I just want some peace and quiet." Karen didn't seem deterred. "Oh, I completely understand. But a little gathering every once in a while would be great for the neighborhood, right? It would be fun. I'm sure the HOA would love it if you opened up your hot tub for a community event." Marcus felt a little uneasy. He wasn't looking for a social gathering at his home, especially in his personal space. But Karen didn't seem to take no for an answer. "Think about it. It could be a good way to get to know everyone." Before he could respond, Karen waved goodbye and walked away, leaving Marcus feeling unsure about what had just happened. He hadn't expected someone to approach him so boldly about his own property, especially when he hadn't even invited anyone over yet. But he tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just being friendly. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that things might not stay as peaceful as he had hoped. The next week, Karen returned with a similar suggestion, this time more persistent. She was standing at his front door when he arrived home from work. "Hi, Marcus, I was thinking about that hot tub idea again," she said, a bright smile on her face. "It's such a great way to unwind, and I think it would be even better if we had a little gathering. For the HOA members, of course. We could make it an official event. Marcus could see where this was going, and he didn't want to be rude, but he wasn't comfortable with the idea. I appreciate the offer, but I like to keep it just for myself when I use it. It's more of a personal space for me. Karen seemed unfazed. Oh, of course, I totally get that. But you know, the neighborhood could really benefit from it. A lot of people are curious about your hot tub, and I'm sure they'd love the chance to use it. It's really just a suggestion. With a forced smile, Marcus kindly declined again, hoping Karen would finally take the hint. He didn't want to seem unwelcoming, but this was his home, and he had every right to enjoy his space without the expectation of sharing it with the whole neighborhood. Still, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of discomfort. It was becoming clear that Karen wasn't just some friendly neighbor. She seemed to have a strong sense of entitlement, as though she thought her position in the HOA gave her the right to make decisions about other people's private property. The next few days passed uneventfully, but Karen's presence loomed large. Marcus would occasionally see her walking by his house with a group of neighbors, casually mentioning how lovely his hot tub was, or how it would be so much fun for everyone to gather there. Each time Marcus politely declined, but Karen didn't seem to understand the message. At this point, Marcus began to realize that his peaceful life was about to be interrupted. The feeling of his privacy being invaded made him more uncomfortable. By the day, he had bought this house for solitude, but now it seemed like his personal space was no longer his own. Karen's persistent suggestions made him feel like he had no control over the situation. He decided that it was time to do something about it. But Marcus wasn't someone who liked confrontation. He wasn't sure how to handle someone like Karen. Someone who was so sure of herself, who thought that because she was part of the HOA she could push people around. But Marcus wasn't about to let her walk all over him, especially when it came to his private space. He began to plan his next steps, quietly determined to put an end to Karen's uninvited visits. But little did he know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would test his patience, his resolve, and his understanding of what it meant to stand up for himself in a community that was no longer as peaceful as it seemed. Marcus had hoped the situation with Karen would settle down on its own. After all, he had politely declined her invitations to use his hot tub multiple times. But as the days passed, it became clearer to him that Karen wasn't going to let up. She was persistent, and more importantly, she was getting creative in finding ways to push her agenda. Her attempts to use his hot tub had turned into a daily, almost scripted routine. Every time Marcus stepped out of his house, Karen was there, waiting in the background, somehow casually mentioning how wonderful it would be to have a small gathering around the hot tub. Sometimes she would stop by when she was out for a walk with other neighbors, waving enthusiastically, and mentioning, almost too casually, how the hot tub was such a great idea for the whole community. One afternoon, as Marcus was sitting on his back porch enjoying a cold drink after a long day at work, Karen appeared again. This time she was with a group of 3 or 4 people, including some other members of the HOA. They were laughing and chatting as they walked down the street. Marcus noticed that they all stopped when they reached his driveway. His heart sank as he realized that Karen was preparing to once again bring up her familiar suggestion. "Hi, Marcus," Karen called out brightly, her smile as wide as ever. "Isn't this the perfect weather for a dip in the hot tub? You know, we were just talking, and everyone here agrees it would be so much fun to have a little gathering. It doesn't have to be anything formal, just a few neighbors enjoying a relaxing evening together." Marcus stood up slowly, trying to hide his frustration. He had hoped that his polite refusals in the past would have been enough to send a clear message. But here she was again, as if nothing had changed. "I've told you before, Karen, I really prefer to keep it to myself," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "I use the hot tub to unwind after work. It's my personal space, and I like it that way." Karen's smile didn't falter, but there was a slight shift in her demeanor. She didn't seem offended, but she wasn't backing off either. "Oh, I totally understand," she said in a tone that was too sweet to be completely sincere. "But you know, everyone loves a little social time, especially after a long week. Just think about it, Marcus. It would be great for the neighborhood." Her friends chimed in, nodding in agreement, almost as if they had rehearsed their lines. "It would be so nice to get together," one of them added. "We can keep it small and low-key. It's just a few people. Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. He knew they weren't just suggesting it for the sake of a small gathering. They were expecting him to open up his private space for them, without any real regard for his boundaries. He wasn't the type of person to get upset easily, but this constant pressure was starting to feel more like an invasion than a friendly request. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Karen and her group of HOA friends didn't seem to understand the meaning of no, and every time they came by, it felt like he was being forced into a corner. "I've already said no, Karen," Marcus said more forcefully this time, his voice calm but serious. "I'm really not interested in hosting anyone in my hot tub. I just want to enjoy my time here by myself. I'd appreciate it if you'd respect that." For a moment, there was silence. The group seemed surprised by Marcus's firmness. They exchanged glances, and Marcus could tell that Karen was trying to decide how to respond. But instead of backing off, she seemed to double down. "Well, I just wanted to make sure you understood how much it would benefit the community," she said, her tone still polite but carrying an edge that Marcus didn't miss. "Maybe you don't realize, but everyone talks about your hot tub, Marcus. It's not just something for you to enjoy alone. It could bring us all closer together." Marcus felt a wave of frustration, but he refused to show it. He knew Karen was used to getting her way, and he wasn't about to let her push him into something he didn't want. "I appreciate your concern for the community, Karen, but this is my personal space," he said firmly. "I'll be happy to help with other things around the neighborhood, but this is where I draw the line." For a moment, Karen seemed taken aback. It was clear she wasn't used to being denied, especially not by someone like Marcus, who had always been polite and respectful. But instead of retreating, she shifted tactics. "Okay, I understand," she said, forcing a smile. "I just thought it would be nice, for the HOA. But I'll let you have your space." With that, Karen turned and walked away with her group, leaving Marcus standing there feeling like he had just been put through another round of mind games. It was clear that Karen wasn't going to give up anytime soon, and Marcus was starting to feel trapped. Every time he stepped outside, it seemed like there was someone new reminding him that his hot tub was now a topic of neighborhood conversation. Weeks went by, and the pressure didn't let up. It wasn't just Karen anymore. More and more people were mentioning his hot tub, sometimes casually, sometimes with a look in their eyes that made Marcus uncomfortable. Neighbors would approach him while he was getting his mail or washing his car, making comments about how great it would be if he opened his backyard for social gatherings. Some people, though they didn't outright ask, would give him knowing looks, as if they expected him to say yes. At first, Marcus tried to keep his cool. He reminded himself that people were just being friendly, trying to get to know him and make him feel like part of the community. But the constant barrage of hints and suggestions wore him down. He wasn't sure what it was about his hot tub that had captured the neighborhood's imagination, but it was as if everyone thought they were entitled to use it just because it was in a shared community space. The final straw came one Saturday afternoon, when Marcus was enjoying a rare weekend off. He had just settled into the hot tub with a cold drink in his hand when he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching his backyard. He looked up to see Karen, this time with a new neighbor, Mrs. Adams, who had recently moved into the house next door. "Hi, Marcus," Karen called out as she approached the fence, waving enthusiastically. "We were just talking, and Mrs. Adams here has been dying to try out your hot tub. She's new to the area and thought it would be a nice way to get to know everyone." Marcus was speechless for a moment. He couldn't believe it. This wasn't just an invitation anymore. It was becoming an expectation. "I've already told you, Karen," Marcus said, his voice low but firm, trying to stay calm despite the rising frustration. "This is my personal space. I don't want anyone using it, and I certainly don't want to host anyone here." Karen hesitated for a second but then smiled again, almost too sweetly. "Oh, I understand," she said with a chuckle. "I just thought I'd ask again. You never know." But Marcus could see it now. There was a certain determination in her eyes, as if she thought that eventually he would cave in. He stood up from the hot tub, his patience finally running out. "No means no, Karen. I'm done explaining myself. Please respect my boundaries." Karen seemed surprised by his forceful response, but she didn't push the issue any further. As she and Mrs. Adams walked away, Marcus felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had stood his ground, but deep down he knew that this wasn't over. Karen wasn't going to give up easily, and as long as she was in charge of the HOA, Marcus was going to have to keep fighting to protect his peace. The weeks that followed felt like a constant tug-of-war for Marcus. Karen's persistence had worn him down, and he found himself growing increasingly agitated every time she appeared on his doorstep or casually mentioned his hot tub to others. He had always been a calm and patient person, but Karen's relentless behavior was starting to get under his skin. The situation wasn't just an inconvenience anymore, it was becoming an invasion of his privacy. Every time he stepped outside, he was reminded of the pressure surrounding him. Neighbors he barely knew would drop hints about how great it would be to gather in his backyard. Sometimes it was a casual comment. "It would be so nice if we could use your hot tub sometime." Other times it was more pointed. "Have you thought about having people over to enjoy it? The HOA really thinks it's a great idea." Marcus had tried his best to be polite even after the dozens of suggestions. But now, he was beginning to feel the weight of being constantly pestered about something that should have been a simple, private part of his life. His once peaceful sanctuary had become the center of unwanted attention. He didn't know how much longer he could take it. Karen wasn't the only one putting pressure on him. The other neighbors seemed to be rallying behind her, perhaps hoping they could have a piece of his personal space as well. One evening, Marcus was sitting in his living room enjoying a quiet moment with a book when he heard a knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, but when he opened it, there stood Karen, smiling her usual wide smile. She was alone this time, but her presence alone made Marcus tense up. He hadn't been looking forward to another one of these encounters, but he knew it was inevitable. "Hi, Marcus," Karen said brightly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all," Marcus replied, though he could feel his patience thinning. He tried to keep his tone neutral, even though he felt a growing frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I just wanted to talk to you for a minute," Karen continued, not even waiting for him to invite her in. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I totally understand that you want your privacy, but I also think you might not realize how much the neighborhood could benefit from having a community space like your hot tub. It would really bring everyone together." Marcus clenched his jaw, trying to stay composed. He had heard this speech before. It was the same line she always used, but it was becoming harder to ignore. She was still acting as though he had to share his private space with the whole neighborhood because it would bring everyone together. "I've told you before, Karen," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not interested in hosting anyone. My hot tub is for me to relax in, not for neighborhood gatherings. I've already made myself clear." Karen didn't seem to take his words seriously. Instead, she pressed on, her tone soft but insistent. "I get that, Marcus. I really do. But maybe you just haven't thought of the bigger picture here. It's not just about the hot tub. It's about making the neighborhood feel more like a community, you know?" Marcus could feel his blood start to boil. He had already made it clear that he didn't want to host anyone, and yet here she was, pushing him to reconsider. He was starting to feel like he couldn't even have a simple conversation without Karen turning it into an attempt to get what she wanted. "I understand what you're saying, but it's not your decision to make, Karen," Marcus said, his voice rising just a little. "This is my property, and I don't owe anyone an explanation. I've said no, and that should be the end of it." For the first time, Marcus could see a flicker of surprise in Karen's eyes. It was as if she wasn't used to being challenged in this way. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but she seemed to reconsider. After a brief pause, she sighed and gave him a tight smile. "Well, I suppose I'll just have to leave." "It's up to you, Marcus," she said, her tone no longer as friendly. "But you should know that this isn't going to be the end of it. People are going to keep asking about your hot tub, and the HOA is going to keep encouraging you to open it. Maybe you'll change your mind eventually." Marcus didn't say anything. He stood there, staring at her, feeling a sense of finality in the air. Karen had always been confident in her approach, but now, for the first time, it seemed like She was starting to realize that Marcus wasn't going to give in. He wasn't going to be intimidated by her position or the pressure of the HOA. He had his boundaries, and he was determined to protect them. Karen took one last look at him, her smile now replaced by a look of thinly veiled annoyance. "Well, I tried," she said with a shrug as if to dismiss the whole thing. "I just thought you might reconsider. Have a good evening, Marcus." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing in his doorway. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, but it didn't last long. Karen was still in charge of the HOA, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that she wasn't going to back down. Even if she couldn't get him to open up his hot tub, she would find another way to pressure him. Later that evening, Marcus sat down at his kitchen table, thinking deeply. He had tried to avoid confrontation, but it was clear that wasn't going to work. Karen was relentless, and he couldn't keep dodging her. He realized that he needed to do something more decisive to protect his privacy. The next day, Marcus decided to take action. He went to the HOA office and requested a meeting with the board. He didn't want to escalate things, but he also knew he couldn't keep going on like this. The HOA had been too focused on its own interests and not enough on respecting the boundaries of its residents. It was time for him to make his voice heard and stand up for his rights. At the meeting, Marcus explained his situation calmly and professionally. He outlined his reasons for wanting to keep his hot tub private and how Karen's constant requests had made him feel uncomfortable in his own home. The board members, who had always been somewhat distant and unaware of the finer details of the neighborhood, seemed taken aback by the situation. They hadn't realized how far Karen had gone with her attempts to involve Marcus in community events. One board member, Mr. Smith, a quiet man who had lived in the neighborhood for years, spoke up. "It's clear that Marcus values his privacy, and it's important for us as a community to respect that. Karen, while well-meaning, may have overstepped in her efforts to bring people together." Marcus felt a surge of relief. For the first time, he felt like someone was truly listening to him. He wasn't alone in this battle. The meeting ended with the board agreeing to issue a formal reminder to the HOA members about respecting their neighbors' personal spaces and boundaries. It was a small victory, but for Marcus it was enough. As he left the meeting, Marcus felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The battle wasn't over, but it was a step in the right direction. He knew that the next time Karen came knocking, he would be ready. No matter what, he wasn't going to let anyone take away his peace. The meeting with the HOA board had been a turning point for Marcus. For the first time since he moved into the neighborhood, he felt like he wasn't fighting this battle alone. The board had listened to his concerns, and more importantly, they had taken his side. Marcus had expected some resistance, but instead the board members seemed genuinely concerned about the situation. They agreed that Karen had overstepped and promised to issue a reminder to the HOA about respecting neighbors' privacy and boundaries. It wasn't a full victory yet, but it was a relief to have the backing of the HOA board. Marcus knew that this wouldn't stop Karen from trying again, but it gave him a sense of confidence that he hadn't had before. Now, if she tried to push him again, there were rules in place that could back him up. The next few days were tense. Karen didn't approach him directly, but Marcus could feel the change in the air. The neighborhood had always been friendly, but after the board meeting, things seemed a bit more charged. The other neighbors were still cordial, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. It was clear that the HOA's intervention had set the stage for something bigger. One morning, Marcus was getting his mail when he noticed Karen walking down the street with a few neighbors in tow. She looked up as she saw him, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. He could tell by her expression that she was still not ready to let this go. There was a new, subtle shift in her demeanor. She didn't look as confident as she once did, but there was a quiet determination behind her smile that told Marcus she wasn't done with him yet. "Good morning, Marcus," Karen called out, walking over to him with the same wide smile. "How are you doing today?" Marcus smiled back, trying to keep the conversation light. "Good morning, Karen. I'm doing well, thanks." She stopped, a few feet in front of him, almost as if she were weighing her words. After a brief pause, she said, You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the meeting. I guess I got a little carried away. I do understand that you want your privacy, and I'll respect that from now on. Marcus felt a little surprised by her sudden shift in tone. He had expected her to be upset or at least defensive, but her tone was much softer than he had anticipated. Maybe the board's intervention had truly made her realize that she couldn't just push people around anymore. I appreciate that, Karen, Marcus replied, keeping his tone neutral. I just want to enjoy my space without feeling like I'm being pressured. She nodded, though there was a slight hesitation in her eyes. Of course, I understand. But you know, Marcus, a little community spirit wouldn't hurt. It's all about bringing people together. Marcus couldn't help but feel a flicker of annoyance at her words. It seemed like she was still trying to plant the idea in his head, even though she had just said she would respect his boundaries. He smiled politely but said, I understand the importance of community, Karen, but it's just not something I'm comfortable with. Karen seemed to pause for a moment, looking at him more carefully than before. She seemed to realize that her usual tactics were no longer working. Instead of pressing the issue, she simply smiled and nodded. Well, I'll let you get back to your day. Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Marcus nodded, relieved that the conversation seemed to be ending on a peaceful note. Thanks, Karen. I appreciate that. With that, she turned and walked away, her group of neighbors following closely behind. Marcus stood there for a moment watching them go. He had expected more of a confrontation, but instead, Karen had seemed to back off. Maybe the HOA's warning had finally made her understand that there were limits to her authority. As the days passed, Marcus began to notice subtle changes in the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once seemed indifferent or even a little too eager to get involved with his personal space now seemed to keep their distance. It wasn't that they were unfriendly, but there was a newfound respect for his privacy. He no longer felt like his every move was being watched, and he could enjoy his time in his hot tub without feeling guilty or pressured. Still, there was one thing that kept nagging at him: Karen. Despite her more subdued behavior, Marcus could sense that she hadn't truly given up. She was too used to being in control, and he knew she wouldn't just let this go without a fight. The HOA had set a precedent, but Karen wasn't going to lose without making one last attempt to regain her power. That moment came sooner than he expected. One evening, as Marcus was heading out to his hot tub, he noticed a strange car parked near his driveway. At first he thought it might be one of the neighbors, but as he got closer, he realized that it was Karen's car. His heart sank. He had hoped the issue had been settled, but apparently Karen had other plans. He stood there for a moment, trying to decide whether to confront her or let it go. He didn't want to make a scene, but he also wasn't going to back down. With a deep breath, he walked toward the backyard, where he could see Karen standing by the hot tub, her back to him. Karen, Marcus called out, his voice steady but firm. She turned around quickly, looking a little surprised, but not caught off guard. Oh, Marcus, I didn't mean to intrude. I just thought I'd stop by to chat. Marcus crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing slightly. You know, Karen, I thought we had an understanding. This is my personal space, and I've already told you I'm not interested in sharing it. Karen smiled, but there was something almost calculating about it. I know. I just wanted to make sure everything was clear between us. No, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I really do understand your need for privacy. Marcus was starting to get frustrated. He had been clear. The HOA had backed him up, so why was she still standing there acting like nothing had changed? I'm glad to hear that, Marcus said, his patience thinning. But this conversation has already happened, Karen. There's nothing left to discuss. Karen took a step back, her smile slipping just a little. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. Well, I just wanted to make sure you knew I wasn't giving up on the community. It's just that we could have such a great time together, you know? Marcus didn't even let her finish. No. I've said no before, and I'm saying no again. I'm done. He turned and walked away, leaving Karen standing there, still trying to find a way to regain control. He could feel his heart racing, but he knew he had made the right decision. He wasn't going to let her dictate his life any longer. As he sat back in his hot tub later that evening, he realized something important. This wasn't just about the hot tub anymore. It was about standing up for himself, setting boundaries, and showing Karen that she couldn't push him around. He had won a small victory, but it was the most important one of all. He had reclaimed his space, and that was something no one could take away from him. In the days that followed, Marcus felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. The battle over his hot tub had been hard fought, but now it seemed like it was finally over. Karen, for all her persistence and the pressure she had applied, had been forced to back off. He had stood his ground, and the HOA had stepped in to support him. Marcus felt like he had reclaimed his privacy and his peace of mind. However, there was still a lingering feeling of tension in the air. Even though Karen had backed off, the neighborhood was still adjusting to the change. Some neighbors were now more distant than before, while others seemed to tiptoe around him, unsure if they should still talk about the hot tub or mention community events. Marcus could sense that the once easygoing dynamic in the neighborhood had shifted, and it felt like everyone was walking on eggshells, unsure of how to act around him after everything that had happened. Marcus didn't want to feel isolated, and he certainly didn't want to become a troublemaker in the eyes of the neighborhood. He liked the idea of living in a community where people respected one another, but he also knew that sometimes standing up for what you believe in comes with consequences. What bothered him, though, was how some of the neighbors who had been supportive of him seemed to distance themselves as well. It was as if they were afraid of Karen's influence or unsure if supporting him would make them a target of her next. As the weeks went by, Marcus began to notice a shift in the way Karen behaved around him. Her previous boldness was replaced with a quieter, more calculating attitude. She would still pass by his house now and then, but she no longer made the same loud suggestions or tried to involve him in neighborhood events. She had, in a way, retreated into the background, but Marcus knew that didn't mean she was truly done. She was the type of person who always looked for a way to regain control, and it was only a matter of time before she would try to find another angle to challenge him. But for the time being, Marcus was free to enjoy his life again. He started spending more time outdoors, taking long walks around the neighborhood and finding moments to relax in his backyard. He could now sit on his porch with a cup of coffee in the morning without wondering if someone would come by to ask about his hot tub. The sense of peace he had been craving had finally returned. He was no longer worried about the next confrontation or about being constantly watched or judged. One Saturday afternoon, as Marcus was tending to his garden, he saw Mrs. Turner, his older neighbor, walking down the street. She waved at him and he waved back, a friendly smile spreading across his face. Mrs. Turner had been one of the first people he met when he moved into the neighborhood, and they had exchanged a few pleasantries. Over the months, she had always been kind and respectful, unlike some of the other more forceful neighbors. As she got closer, she slowed down and stopped to chat with him. "You know, Marcus," she began, "I just wanted to check in on you. I know things were a little tense around here for a while, and I wanted to make sure you're doing all right." Marcus smiled, grateful for her concern. "I'm doing well, thank you. Things have settled down quite a bit. It feels good to finally have some peace." Mrs. Turner nodded knowingly. "I can imagine. I've been in this neighborhood for a long time and I've seen a lot of changes. But I have to say, I was really impressed with how you handled everything with Karen. Most people would have just backed down or let things slide, but you stood your ground. You did what was right." Marcus felt a wave of appreciation for her. Kind words. It meant a lot to him to hear that someone respected his decision and recognized the effort it had taken to protect his boundaries. "Thanks, Mrs. Turner, it wasn't easy, but I had to do it. I couldn't let anyone walk all over me, especially when it came to my privacy." She smiled warmly, her eyes twinkling with a mix of admiration and respect. "I admire that. It's not always easy to stand up for yourself, especially when it feels like everyone else has a different opinion. But you showed the neighborhood that it's important to have boundaries. We all have our own space, and that should be respected." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a deep sense of pride. He had done what he needed to do, and it had made a difference. Mrs. Turner's words reassured him that he wasn't just fighting for his own peace but for something bigger, a reminder to the entire neighborhood that respect and privacy were important values to uphold. As the days passed, Marcus began to rebuild his relationships with the neighbors who had drifted away. It wasn't immediate, and it took time for things to feel normal again. But the more he interacted with people, the more he realized that most of them had been quietly supporting him. Some were just too afraid to speak out in case it would lead to more tension with Karen. But as time went on, the atmosphere in the neighborhood lightened, and people slowly began to act like themselves again. One day, a few months after the whole ordeal with Karen, Marcus received an invitation in his mailbox. It was from the HOA, and it was an invitation to a neighborhood barbecue. It was an annual event that had always been a casual affair, and Marcus had never attended before. At first, he wasn't sure if he should go. After everything that had happened, he wasn't sure if he wanted to show up at a community event where he might have to face some of the people who had supported Karen. But as he thought about it, he realized that he couldn't let one person's actions stop him from enjoying his life. The neighborhood had been through a lot, and he had learned valuable lessons about standing up for himself and asserting his boundaries. If he wanted to continue building connections with his neighbors, he would have to move past the tension and be willing to reconnect. With that thought in mind, Marcus decided to attend the barbecue. He didn't expect it to be easy, but he knew it was the right thing to do. When he arrived, he was greeted with smiles from several neighbors who had been friendly to him throughout the ordeal. Karen was there too, but she didn't approach him. Instead, she seemed to keep to herself, quietly chatting with a few people she seemed to be friendly with. Marcus spent the evening talking to his neighbors, laughing, and enjoying the food. It felt good to be back to some sense of normalcy. Karen had kept her distance, and while the tension between them wasn't gone, it was clear that she had learned to respect his boundaries. The BBQ marked the beginning of a new chapter in Marcus's life in the neighborhood. Things would never be exactly the same, but the peace he had fought for was finally his. As the evening drew to a close, Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, looking around. He realized that, in the end, it wasn't just about the hot tub or even about Karen. It was about his ability to take control of his life and stand up for what was important to him. He had faced a difficult challenge, but he had emerged stronger, more confident, and with a greater understanding of the value of boundaries and self-respect. And as he looked around at the people who had once been distant, he saw a neighborhood that had come together, not because of any hot tub or social gathering, but because they had learned something important from his example: respect for one another's space and the power of standing up for what's right. Marcus walked home that night, a smile on his face, feeling more at peace than he had in a long time. The battle wasn't over, but he had won the most important victory of all. He had regained control over his life and his personal space, and he had done it with integrity and courage.